all Madison's voice. I hope she dies before the wedding so I don't have to deal with her anymore. My phone rang. Madison's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won out. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, testing my ability to maintain normalcy while knowing what I knew. "Hi, Grandma. I wanted to call and thank you again for everything you're doing. Tyler and I are so grateful, and we can't wait to celebrate with you in 3 weeks." The performance was flawless. Genuine warmth, believable excitement, perfect granddaughter behavior. If I hadn't heard her true feelings, I would have been touched by her call. "It's my pleasure, Madison. I love you so much." "I love you too, Grandma. You're the best." She loved me so much that she hoped I'd die before her wedding. She thought I was the best grandmother for funding her dream while she wished I wasn't around to see it. "Madison, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, Grandma. What is it? Are you happy with how the wedding planning has been going? Do you feel like you've had enough control over the decisions?" There was a slight pause, the first crack in her performance. "What do you mean? Everything's been wonderful. You've been so generous and helpful. I mean, do you feel like your voice has been heard? Like the wedding reflects what you and Tyler really want?" Another pause, longer this time. "Grandma, is something wrong? You sound different." I was different. I was no longer the naive woman who believed her granddaughter's gratitude was genuine. "I've just been thinking about whether I've been too involved in the planning process. Whether maybe you'd prefer to handle more of the decisions yourself." No, everything's been perfect. I wouldn't change anything about how we've done this." The lie came so smoothly, with such practiced ease, that I marveled at Madison's skill. She'd been deceiving me for months with this level of competence. "Well, that's good to hear. I'll let you go then. See you soon, sweetheart. Love you, Grandma." I hung up and stared at the phone, amazed by the disconnect between Madison's public persona and her private thoughts. She just told me she wouldn't change anything about our planning process while actively wishing I was dead so she could plan differently. The call had been a test, and Madison had failed it completely. I opened the first envelope and removed the cancellation letter for Maple Ridge Country Club, the venue where Madison had dreamed of dancing at her reception, where she'd envisioned the perfect photographs, where she'd planned to celebrate the beginning of her married life. My signature on the contract made me the client. My $1,500 deposit gave me cancellation rights. My 68 years of life experience told me that continuing to fund someone who wished I was dead would be the height of foolishness. I sealed the letter back in its envelope and moved to the next one. Elegant Events Catering. The 5-course dinner Madison had selected after excluding me from the tasting. The menu I was paying for but apparently had no right to influence. The $2,000 deposit I'd forfeit to avoid paying the remaining $12,000. One by one, I reviewed each cancellation letter, mentally calculating the financial and emotional costs. By the time I finished, the mathematics were clear. I would lose $15,000 in deposits but save $65,000 in final payments, and more importantly, I would preserve something that had no price tag: my self-respect. The phone calls began at 10 o'clock sharp, each one precisely timed according to the list Marcus had prepared. I started with the largest contracts and worked my way down, maintaining the same professional tone I'd used when closing Evelyn's table. "Maple Ridge Country Club, this is Jennifer. Jennifer, this is Evelyn Harper. I need to cancel the wedding reception scheduled for 3 weeks from Saturday." "Oh my goodness, Mrs. Harper. I'm so sorry to hear that. Is everything all right?" "There have been some family circumstances that require cancellation. I understand I'll forfeit my deposit, but I won't be responsible for the final payment. Let me pull up your contract. Yes, you're within the 30-day cancellation window, so you'll lose the $1,500 deposit but avoid the remaining $8,000 in charges. I'll send you written confirmation today." "Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate your professionalism." The next call was to Elegant Events Catering, then Morrison Photography, then each vendor in turn. Every conversation followed the same pattern: Initial shock, confirmation of cancellation terms, and professional handling of an obviously difficult situation. By noon, I had systematically dismantled $80,000 worth of wedding dreams with 15 phone calls and the sacrifice of $15,000 in deposits. Madison's perfect wedding no longer existed. But I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Freedom. I made myself lunch and sat in my sunroom, looking out at the garden William and I had planted together years ago. The roses were blooming despite the season's challenges, their beauty undaunted by the harsh weather they'd endured. Sometimes survival required cutting back the dead growth to protect the healthy parts. Sometimes preservation meant sacrificing what looked beautiful on the surface to save what was genuinely valuable underneath. I was 68 years old, and I had just learned that it was never too late to stop accepting unacceptable behavior, even from people you loved. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Can't wait to see you at the final venue walkthrough tomorrow. This is going to be the most beautiful wedding ever." I stared at the message, marveling at the timing. Madison was expressing excitement about a venue that no longer existed for an event that would never happen, sent to a grandmother whose death she'd been anticipating. I typed back, "We definitely need to talk about the wedding plans. There have been some developments." Her response came immediately. "What kind of developments? Is everything okay? We'll discuss it when we talk. Nothing for you to worry about right now." That was technically true. Madison wouldn't need to worry about anything until she started receiving phone calls from confused vendors, probably within the next few hours. I spent the afternoon researching cruise packages to Alaska, something I'd always wanted to do but had never justified the expense. A luxury suite on a 2-week cruise would cost exactly $50,000. Less than I was saving by canceling Madison's wedding, but more than I'd ever spent on myself at one time. The symbolism was perfect. The money I'd saved by refusing to fund someone who wished I was dead would instead be invested in my own happiness and experiences. I booked the cruise that afternoon, selecting a suite with a private balcony and scheduling departure for the day after Madison's canceled wedding. If my granddaughter wanted me gone, I would oblige, but on my own terms and at my own expense. The first call from Madison came at 4:30. "Grandma, I just got the strangest call from Maple Ridge. They said you canceled the reception venue. But that can't be right, can it? There must be some mistake." I took a deep breath, preparing for the conversation that would change our family forever. "There's no mistake, Madison. I canceled all the wedding vendors this morning." "What? But why? What happened?" The genuine confusion in her voice was almost convincing. She'd been lying to me so skillfully for so long that indignation came naturally when her deception was threatened. "I overheard your conversation with Ashley yesterday. The one where you said you hoped I would die before the wedding so you could get my inheritance and plan the wedding you actually wanted." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear Madison's mind racing, trying to find an explanation or excuse that would salvage the situation. "Grandma, I was just stressed. I didn't mean. You calculated my net worth, Madison. You said I was naive about business and that I was trapped by the contracts I'd signed. You called me an embarrassing burden and said you couldn't wait to stop pretending to care about my opinions. I was just venting to a friend. I didn't mean any of it. You know I love you. You meant every word and we both know it. But you were wrong about something important. I'm not trapped by those contracts. I was the primary client, which means I had every right to cancel them." "But Grandma, the wedding is in 3 weeks. What am I supposed to do?" The panic in her voice might have moved me once, but now I heard only the fear of someone whose carefully constructed plan had collapsed. "That's not my problem to solve anymore, Madison. You wanted to plan your own wedding without my interference. Now you can. But I can't afford this kind of wedding on my own. You know Tyler and I don't have that kind of money. I know exactly what you can afford, Madison. You were planning a $5,000 wedding before I offered to help. You can still have that wedding. All my friends are expecting this beautiful reception at Maple Ridge. The invitations have already been sent. Then you'll have to explain to your friends why the plans changed. Perhaps you can tell them that you wished your grandmother was dead and she decided not to fund your dream wedding anymore. I didn't mean it like that. I was just frustrated with all the planning stress. Madison, you didn't just say you were frustrated. You said you hoped I would die. You calculated how much money you'd inherit. You said I was naive and that I was trapped. Those weren't words spoken in frustration. Those were your true feelings. The silence stretched between us, filled with 24 years of what I'd thought was genuine love and what I now knew was calculated performance. Please, Grandma, Madison's voice cracked, and for a moment she sounded like the little girl I'd once comforted after nightmares. I'll apologize. I'll do anything. Just please don't ruin my wedding. I'm not ruining your wedding, Madison. I'm simply not paying for it anymore. You can still get married. You just can't do it on my dime while wishing I was dead. I hung up and immediately turned off my phone. The calls would continue. From Madison, from Christopher, from Rebecca, from Tyler's family. Everyone would try to convince me that Madison's death wish was just stress, just poor word choice, just anything other than what it actually was. A calculated assessment of my value versus my money. But I was done being convinced to accept unacceptable behavior. That evening, as I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and the cruise brochure spread across my coffee table, I felt something I hadn't experienced since William's death. Anticipation for my own future. For 3 years I'd been living for other people, honoring William's memory, supporting Christopher's family, funding Madison's dreams. I'd forgotten what it felt like to make plans based purely on my own desires and interests. Alaska in 3 weeks. Glaciers and wildlife and luxury accommodations I'd never allowed myself to consider. The money I'd saved by refusing to fund my own humiliation would instead purchase experiences and memories that would belong entirely to me. My phone, even turned off, seemed to vibrate with the weight of missed calls and unread texts. But for the first time in months, the urgent needs and demands of others felt distant and manageable. I had made my choice. Madison would have to live with hers. The next 3 days passed in a blur of phone calls, accusations, and family drama that confirmed everything I'd suspected about Madison's character and my family's priorities. Christopher called first, his voice tight with stress and confusion. Mom, what's going on? Madison is hysterical. She says you canceled her entire wedding. I canceled the wedding I was paying for, yes. Madison is free to plan whatever celebration she can afford on her own. But why? What happened between you two? I found myself facing the same decision I'd been avoiding. How much of Madison's betrayal to reveal to her parents? Christopher deserved to know the truth, but I also recognized that learning his daughter had wished for his mother's death would devastate him. Christopher, Madison has made it very clear that she sees my involvement in her wedding as interference rather than generosity. She wanted to plan her own celebration without my input. And now she can do exactly that. Mom, that doesn't make sense. Madison loves you. She's grateful for everything you've been doing. The innocent belief in his voice reminded me how skillfully Madison had been performing for everyone, not just me. Son, there are things about Madison's true feelings that would be difficult for you to hear. I overheard her expressing sentiments about me that made it impossible for me to continue funding her wedding. What kind of sentiments? I took a deep breath, knowing that once I said these words, there would be no taking them back. She told a friend that she hoped I would die before the wedding so she wouldn't have to deal with my interference anymore, and so she could inherit my money and plan the wedding she actually wanted. The silence that followed was profound. I could almost hear Christopher's world shifting as he processed what I'd just told him. Mom, that can't be right. Madison would never say something like that. I heard her, Christopher. Word for word. She calculated my inheritance value and said my death would solve all her problems. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe she was just venting about stress. The need to protect his daughter was understandable, but it was also exactly what I'd expected. When faced with unpleasant truths about people we love, denial is often the first response. Christopher, she said she hoped I would die. There's no misunderstanding those words. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Christopher alternating